right,
Okay.
so here we are reading Rabindranath Tagore, chapter 2. Kwan, is there anything you'd like to say to start us off?
No, not necessarily. My practical method with that text would be to let people read it,
Hmm.
and I would try to put some poetical and technical remarks when needed.
Hmm.
It's better like that. As I said to you, it's better to take a text more poetical, like the one by Tagore, to explain Adi Atma Vidya, the science to make the soul complete, and to put some technical remarks from time to time rather than the reverse would be, I think, be less interesting for most people.
Okay, sounds great. So with that in mind, who would like to be the reader for chapter 2 today?
I can read.
All right.
Once, during the improvisation of a story by a young child, I was coaxed to take my part as the hero. The child imagined that I had been shut in a dark room, locked from the outside. She asked me, "What will you do for your freedom?" And I answered, "Shout for help." But however desirable that might be, if it succeeded immediately, it would be unfortunate for the story. And thus she, in her imagination, had to clear the neighborhood of all kinds of help that my cries might reach. I was compelled to think of some violent means of kicking through this passive resistance, but for the sake of the story, the door had to be made of steel. I found a key, but it would not fit, and the child was delighted at the development of the story, jumping over obstructions. Life's story of evolution, the main subject of which is the opening of the doors of the dark dungeon, seems to develop in the same manner. Difficulties were created, and at each offer and answer, the story had to discover further obstacles in order to carry on the adventure. For to come to an absolutely satisfactory conclusion is to come to the end of all things. And in that case, the great child would have nothing else to do but to shut her curtain and go to sleep. The spirit of life began her chapter by introducing a simple living cell against the tremendously powerful challenge of the vast inert. The triumph was thrillingly great, which still refuses to yield its secret. She did not stop there, but defiantly courted difficulties, and in the technique of her art, exploited an element which still baffles our logic. This is the harmony of self-adjusting interrelationship, impossible to analyze. She brought close together numerous cell units, and by grouping them into a self-sustaining sphere of cooperation, elaborated a larger unit. It was not a mere agglomeration. The grouping had its caste system in the division of functions, and yet an intimate unity of kinship. The creative life summoned a larger army of cells under her command and imparted into them, let us say, a communal spirit that fought with all its might whenever its integrity was menaced. This was the tree, which has its inner harmony and inner movement of life in its beauty, its strength, its sublime dignity of endurance, its pilgrimage to the unknown through the tiniest gates of reincarnation. It was a sufficiently marvelous achievement to be a fit termination to the creative venture. But the creative genius cannot stop exhausted. More windows have to be opened, and she went out of her accustomed way and brought another factor into her work, that of locomotion. Risks of living were enhanced, offering opportunities to the daring resourcefulness of the spirit of life, for she seems to revel in occasions for a fight against the giant matter, which has rigidly prohibitory immigration laws against all newcomers from life's shore. So the fish was furnished with appliances for moving in an element which offered its density for an obstacle. The air offered an even more difficult obstacle in its lightness, but the challenge was accepted, and the bird was gifted with a marvelous pair of wings that negotiated with the subtle laws of the air and found in it a better ally than the reliable soil of the stable earth. The Arctic snow set up its frigid sentinel. The tropical desert uttered in its scorching breath a gigantic no against all life's children. But those peremptory prohibitions were defied, and the frontiers, though guarded by a death penalty, were triumphantly crossed. This process of conquest should be described as progress for the kingdom of life. It journeyed on through one success to another by dealing with the laws of nature through the help of the invention of new instruments. This field of life's onward march is a field of ruthless competition, because the material world is the world of quantity, where resources are limited, and victory waits for those who have superior facility in their weapons. Therefore, success in the path of progress for one group must often run parallel to defeat in another. It appears that such scramble and fight for opportunities of living among numerous small combatants suggested at last an imperialism of big, bulky flesh, a huge system of muscles and bones, thick and heavy coats of armor and enormous tails. The idea of such indecorous massiveness must have seemed natural to life's providence, for the victory in the world of quantity might reasonably appear to depend upon the bigness of dimension. But such gigantic paraphernalia of defense and attack resulted in an utter defeat, the records of which every day are being dug up from the desert sands and ancient mudflats. These represent the fragments that strew the forgotten paths of a great retreat in the battle of existence. For the heavy weight which these creatures carried was mainly composed of bones, hides, shells, teeth, and claws that were non-living, and therefore imposed its whole huge pressure upon life that needed freedom and growth for the perfect expression of its own vital nature. The resources for living which the earth offered for her children were recklessly spent by these megalomaniac monsters of an immoderate appetite for the sake of maintaining a cumbersome system of dead burdens that thwarted them in their true progress. Such a losing game has now become obsolete. To the few stragglers of that party, like the rhinoceros or the hippopotamus, has been allotted a very small space on this earth, absurdly inadequate to their formidable strength and magnitude of proportions, making them look forlornly pathetic in the sublimity of their incongruousness. These and their extinct forerunners have been the biggest failures in life's experiments. And then, on some obscure dusk of dawn, the experiment entered upon a completely new phase of disarmament proposal, when little man made his appearance in the arena, bringing with him expectations and suggestions that are unfathomably great. We must know that the evolution process of the world has made its progress towards the revelation of its truth. That is to say, some inner value which is not in the extension in space and duration in time. When life came out, it did not bring with it any new materials into existence. Its elements are the same, which are the materials for the rocks and minerals, only it evolved a value in them which cannot be measured and analyzed. The same thing is true with regard to mind and the consciousness of self. They are revelations of a great meaning, the self-expression of a truth. In man, this truth has made its positive appearance and is struggling to make its manifestation more and more clear. That which is eternal is realizing itself in history through the obstructions of limits. The physiological process in the progress of life's evolution seems to have reached its finality in man. We cannot think of any noticeable addition or modification in our vital instruments which we are likely to allow to persist. If any individual is born by chance with an extra pair of eyes or ears or some unexpected limbs like stowaways without passports, we are sure to do our best to eliminate them from our bodily organization. Any new chance of a too obviously physical variation is certain to meet with a determined disapproval from man, the most powerful veto being expected from his aesthetic nature, which peremptorily refuses to calculate advantage when its majesty is offended by any sudden license of form. We all know that the back of our body has a wide surface practically unguarded. From the strategic point of view, this oversight is unfortunate, causing us annoyances and indignities, if nothing worse, through unwelcome intrusions. And this could reasonably justify in our minds regret for retrenchment in the matter of an original tale, whose memorial we are still made to carry in secret. But the least attempt at the rectification of the policy of economy is this direction is indignantly presented. I strongly believe that the idea of ghosts had its best chance with our timid imagination in our sensitive back, a field of dark ignorance. And yet it is too late for me to hint that one of our eyes could profitably have been spared for our burden carrier back, so unjustly neglected and haunted by undefined fears. Thus, while all innovation is stubbornly opposed, there's every sign of a comparative carelessness about the physiological efficiency of the human body. Some of our organs are losing their original vigor. The civilized life within walled enclosures has naturally caused in man a weakening of his power of sight and hearing, along with subtle sense of the distant. Because of our habit of taking cooked food, we give less employment to our teeth and a great deal more to the dentist. Spoilt and pampered by clothes, our skin shows lethargy in its function of adjustment to the atmospheric temperature and in its power of quick recovery from hurts. The adventurous life appears to have paused at a crossing in her road before man came. It seems as if she became aware of wastefulness in carrying on her experiments and adding to her inventions purely on the physical plane. It was proved in life's case that 4 is not always twice as much as 2. In living things, it is necessary to keep to the limit of the perfect unit within which the interrelationship must not be inordinately strained. The ambition that seeks power and the augmentation of dimension is doomed. For that perfection which is in the inner quality of harmony becomes choked when quantity overwhelms it in a fury of extravagance. The combination of an exaggerated nose and arm that an elephant carries hanging down its front has its advantage. This may induce us to imagine that it would double the advantage for the animal if its tail also could grow into an additional trunk. But the progress which greedily allows life's field to be crowded with an excessive production of instruments becomes a progress towards death. For life has its own natural rhythm, which a multiplication table has not, and proud progress that rides roughshod over life's cadence kills it at the end with encumbrances that are unrhythmic. As I have already mentioned, such disasters did happen in the history of evolution. The moral of that tragic chapter is that if the tale does not have the decency to know where to stop, the drag of this dependency becomes fatal to the body's empire. Moreover, evolutionary progress on the physical plane inevitably tends to train up its subjects into specialists. The camel is a specialist of the desert and is awkward in the swamp. The hippopotamus, which specializes in the mudlands of the Nile, is helpless in the neighboring desert. Such one-sided emphasis breeds professionalism in life's domain, confining special efficiencies in narrow compartments. The expert training in the aerial sphere is left to the bird. That in the marine is particularly monopolized by the fish. The ostrich is an expert in its own region and would look utterly foolish in an eagle's neighborhood. They have to remain permanently content with advantages that desperately cling to their limits. Such mutilation of the completed ideal of life for the sake of some exclusive privilege of power is inevitable, for that form of progress deals with materials that are physical and therefore necessarily limited. To rescue her own career from such a multiplying burden of the dead and such constriction of specialization seems to have been the object of the spirit of life at one particular stage. For it does not take long to find out that an indefinite pursuit of quantity creates for life, which is essentially qualitative, complexities that lead to a vicious circle. These primeval animals that produced an enormous volume of flesh have had to build a gigantic system of bones to carry the burden. This required in its turn a long and substantial array of tails to give it balance. Thus their bodies, compelled to occupy a vast area, exposed a very large surface which had to be protected by strong, heavy, and capacious armor. A progress which represented a congress of dead materials required a parallel organization of teeth and claws, or horns and hooves, which also were dead. In its own manner, one mechanical burden links itself to other burdens of machines, and life grows to be a carrier of the dead, a mere platform for machinery until it is crushed to death by its interminable paradoxes. We are told that the greater part of a tree is dead matter. The big stem, except for a thin covering, is lifeless. The tree uses it as a prop in its ambition for a high position, and the lifeless timber is the slave that carries on its back the magnitude of the tree. But such a dependence upon a dead dependent has been achieved by the tree at the cost of its real freedom. It had to seek the stable alliance of the earth for the sharing of its burden, which it did by the help of secret underground entanglements, making itself permanently stationary. But the form of life that seeks the great privilege of movement must minimize its load of the dead and must realize that life's progress should be a perfect progress of the inner life itself and not of materials and machinery. The non-living must not continue outgrowing the living, the armor, deadening the skin, the armament, laming the arms. At last, when the spirit of life found her form in man, the effort she had begun completed its cycle, and the truth of her mission glimmered into suggestions, which dimly pointed to some direction of meaning across her own frontier. Before the end of this cycle was reached, all the suggestions had been external. They were concerned with technique, with life's apparatus, with the efficiency of the organs. This might have exaggerated itself into an endless boredom of physical progress. It can be conceded that the eyes of the bee, possessing numerous facets, may have some uncommon advantage which we cannot even imagine, or the glowworm that carries an arrangement for producing light in its person may baffle our capacity and comprehension. Very likely, there are creatures having certain organs that give them sensibilities which we cannot have the power to guess. All such enhanced sensory power merely add to the mileage in life's journey on the same road, lengthening an indefinite distance. They never take us over the border of physical existence. The same thing may be said not only about life's efficiency, but also life's ornaments. The coloring and decorative patterns on the bodies of some of the deep sea creatures makes us silent with amusement. The butterfly's wings, the beetle's back, the peacock's plumes, the shells of the crustaceans, the exuberant outbreak of decoration in plant life have reached a standard of perfection that seems to be final. And yet, if it continues in the same physical direction, then however much variety of surprising excellence it may produce, it leaves out some great element of unuttered meaning. These ornaments are like ornaments lavished upon a captive girl, luxuriously complete within a narrow limit, speaking of a homesickness for a far-away horizon of emancipation, for an inner depth that is beyond the ken of the senses. The freedom in the physical realm is like the circumscribed freedom in a cage. It produces a proficiency which is mechanical and a beauty which is of the surface. To whatever degree of improvement bodily strength and skill may be developed, they keep life tied to a persistence of habit. It is closed, like a mold, useful though it may be for the sake of safety and precisely standardized productions. For centuries, the bee repeats its hive, the weaver bird its nest, the spider its web. The instincts strongly attach themselves to some invariable tendencies of muscles and nerves, never being allowed the privilege of making blunders. The physical functions, in order to be strictly reliable, behave like some model schoolboy, obedient, regular, properly repeating lessons by rote, without mischief or mistake in his conduct, but also without spirit and initiative. It is the flawless perfection of rigid limits, a cousin, possibly a distant cousin, of the inanimate. Instead of allowing a full paradise of perfection to continue in its tame and timid rules of faultless regularity, the spirit of life boldly declared for a further freedom and decided to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. This time her struggle was not against the inert, but against the limitation of her own overburdened agents. She fought against the tutelage of her prudent old prime minister, the faithful instinct. She adopted a novel method of experiment, promulgated new laws, and tried her hand at molding man through a history which was immensely different from that which went before. She took a bold step in throwing open her gates to a dangerously explosive factor which she had cautiously introduced into her counsel, the element of mind. I should not say that it was ever absent, but only that at a certain stage some curtain was removed and its play was made evident, even like the dark heat which, in its glowing intensity, reveals itself in a contradiction of radiancy. Essentially qualitative. Like life itself, the mind does not occupy space. For that very reason, it has no bounds in its mastery of space. Also, like life, mind has its meaning in freedom, which it missed in its earliest dealings with life's children. In the animal, though the mind is allowed to come out of the immediate limits of livelihood, its range is restricted, like the freedom of a child that might run out of its room, but not out of the house, or rather, like the foreign ships to which only a certain port was opened in Japan in the beginning of her contact with the West, in fear of the danger that might befall if the strangers had their uncontrolled opportunity of communication. Mind also is a foreign element for life. Its laws are different, its weapons powerful, its moods and manners most alien. Like Eve of the Semitic mythology, the spirit of life risked the happiness of her placid seclusion to win her freedom. She listened to the whisper of a tempter who promised her the right to a new region of mystery and was urged into a permanent alliance with the stranger. Up to this point, the interest of life was the sole interest in her own kingdom, but another most powerful parallel interest was created with the advent of this adventurer mind from an unknown shore. Their interests clash, and complications of a serious nature arise. I have already referred to some vital organs of man that are suffering from neglect. The only reason has been the diversion created by the mind, interrupting the sole attention which life's functions claimed in the halcyon days of her undisputed monarchy. It is no secret that mind has the habit of asserting its own will for its expression against life's will to live and enforcing sacrifices from her. When lately some adventurers accepted the dangerous enterprise to climb Mount Everest, it was solely through the instigation of the arch-rebel mind. In this case, mind denied its treaty of cooperation with its partner and ignored life's claim to help in her living. The immemorial privileges of the ancient sovereignty of life are too often flouted by the irreverent mind. In fact, all through the course of this alliance, there are constant cases of interference with each other's functions, often with unpleasant and even fatal results. But in spite of this, or very often because of this antagonism, the new current of man's evolution is bringing a wealth to his harbor infinitely beyond the dream of the creatures of monstrous flesh. Do I just keep reading? Yeah.
I think so. I mean, if there's a point that you want to
No, I think it's it's pretty comprehensive.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a lot, but it's at the same time it's comprehensible and it's not overly, like, it's not like reading Leibniz.
No.
Exactly. What I want to say that compared to chapter 1 that we read last time, this chapter 2 is not very dense. Okay, there's a kind of deployment of what I call poetical prose, but not so dense as the short poem at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But I noted some point that would be interesting to discuss later on.
Mm-hmm.
The manner in which man appeared in life's kingdom was in itself a protest and a challenge, the challenge of Jack to the giant. He carried in his body the declaration of mistrust against the crowding of burdensome implements of physical progress. His mind spoke to the naked man, "Fear not," and he stood alone facing the menace of a heavy brigade of formidable muscles. His own puny muscles cried out in despair, and he had to invent for himself in a novel manner and in a new spirit of evolution. This at once gave him his promotion from the passive destiny of the animal to the aristocracy of man. He began to create his further body, his outer organs, the workers which served him and yet did not directly claim a share of his life. Some of the earliest in his list were bows and arrows. Had this change been undertaken by the physical process of evolution, modifying his arms in a slow and gradual manner, it might have resulted in burdensome and ungainly apparatus. Possibly, however, I am unfair, and the dexterity and grace which life's technical instinct possesses might have changed his arm into a shooting medium in a perfect manner and with a beautiful form. In that case, our lyrical literature today would have sung in praise of its fascination, not only for consummate skill in hunting victims, but also for a similar mischief in a metaphorical sense. But even in the service of lyrics, it would show some limitation. For instance, the arms that would specialize in shooting would be awkward in wielding a pen or stringing a lute. But the great advantage in the latest method of human evolution lies in the fact that man's additional new limbs, like bows and arrows, have become detached. They never tie his arms to any exclusive advantage of efficiency. The elephant's trunk, the tiger's paws, the claws of the mole have combined their best expressions in the human arms, which are much weaker in their original capacity than those limbs I have mentioned. It would have been a hugely cumbersome practical joke if the combination of animal limbs had had a simultaneous location in the human organism through some overzeal in biological inventiveness. The first great economy resulting from the new program was the relief of the physical burden, which means the maximum efficiency with the minimum pressure of taxation upon the vital resources of the body. Another mission of benefit was this, that it absolved the spirit of life in man's case from the necessity of specialization for the sake of limited success. This has encouraged man to dream of the possibility of combining in his single person the fish, the bird, the fleet-footed animal that walks on land. Man desired in his completeness to be the one great representative of multiform life, not through wearisome subjection to the haphazard gropings of natural selection, but by the purposeful selection of opportunities with the help of his reasoning mind. It enables the schoolboy who is given a penknife on his birthday to have the advantage over the tiger in the fact that it does not take him 1,000,000 years to obtain its possession, nor another 1,000,000 years for its removal when the instrument proves unnecessary or dangerous. The human mind has compressed ages into a few years for the acquisition of steel-made claws. The only cause of anxiety is that the instrument and the temperament which uses it may not keep pace in perfect harmony. In the tiger, the claws and the temperament, which only a tiger should possess, have had a synchronous development, and in no single tiger is any maladjustment possible between its nails and its tigerliness. But the human boy who grows a claw in the form of a penknife may not at the same time develop the proper temperament necessary for its use, which only a man ought to have. The new organs that today are being added as a supplement to man's original vital stock are too quick and too numerous for his inner nature to develop its own simultaneous concordance with them, and thus we see everywhere innumerable schoolboys in human society playing pranks with their own and other people's lives and welfare by means of newly acquired penknives which have not had time to become humanized. One thing I am sure must have been noticed, that the original plot of the drama is changed, and the mother spirit of life has retired into the background, giving full prominence in the third act to the spirit of man, though the Dowager Queen from her inner apartment still renders necessary help. It is the consciousness in man of his own creative personality which has ushered in this new regime in life's kingdom. And from now onwards, man's attempts are directed fully to capture the government and to make his own code of legislation prevail without a break. We have seen in India those who are called mystics, impatient of the continued regency of Mother Nature in their own body, winning for their will by a concentration of inner forces the vital regions with which our masterful minds have no direct path of communication. But the most important fact that has come into prominence along with the change of direction in our evolution is the possession of a spirit, which has its enormous capital with a surplus far in excess of the requirements of the biological animal in man. Some overflowing influence led us over the strict boundaries of living and offered to us an open space where man's thoughts and dreams could have their holidays. Holidays are for gods who have their joy in creation. In life's primitive paradise, where the mission was merely to live, any luck which came to the creatures entered in from outside by the donations of chance. They lived on perpetual charity, by turns petted and kicked on the back by physical providence. Beggars never can have harmony among themselves. They are envious of one another, mutually suspicious, like dogs living upon their master's favor, showing their teeth, growling, barking, trying to tear one another. This is what science describes as the struggle for existence. This beggar's paradise lacked peace. I am sure the suitors for special favor from fate lived in constant preparedness, inventing and multiplying ornaments. But above the din of the clamor and scramble rises the voice of the angel of surplus, of leisure, of detachment from the compelling claim of physical need, saying to men, rejoice. From his original serfdom as a creature, man takes his right seat as a creator. Whereas before his incessant appeal has been to get, now at last the call comes to him to give. His God, whose help he was in the habit of asking, now stands himself at his door and asks for his offerings. As an animal, he is still dependent upon nature. As a man, he is a sovereign who builds his world and rules it. And there, at this point, comes his religion, whereby he realizes himself in the perspective of the infinite. There is a remarkable verse in the Atharva Veda, which says righteousness, truth, great endeavors, empire, religion, enterprise, heroism, and prosperity, the past and the future, dwell in the surpassing strength of the surplus. What is purely physical has its limits, like the shell of an egg. The liberation is there in the atmosphere of the infinite, which is indefinable, invisible. Religion can have no meaning in the enclosure of mere physical or material interest. It is in the surplus we carry around our personality, the surplus which is like the atmosphere of earth, bringing to her a constant circulation of light and life and delightfulness. I've said in a poem of mine that when the child is detached from its mother's womb, it finds its mother in a real relationship whose truth is in freedom. Man, in his detachment, has realized himself in a wider and deeper relationship with the universe. In his moral life, he has the sense of his obligation and his freedom at the same time, and this is goodness. In his spiritual life, his sense of the union and the will which is free has its culmination in love. The freedom of opportunity he wins for himself in nature's region by uniting his power with nature's forces. The freedom of social relationship he attains through owning responsibility to his community, thus gaining its collective power for his own welfare. In the freedom of consciousness, he realizes the sense of his unity with his larger being, finding fulfillment in the dedicated life of an ever-progressive truth and ever-active love. The first attachment achieved by man is physical. It represents his freedom from the necessity of developing the power of his senses and limbs in the limited area of his own physiology, having for itself an unbounded background with an immense result in consequence. Nature's original intention was that man should have the allowance of his sight power ample enough for his surroundings and a little over. But to have to develop an astronomical telescope on our skull would cause a worse crisis of bankruptcy than it did to the mammoth, whose densely foolish body indulged in an extravagance of tusks. A snail carries its house on its back, and therefore the material, the shape, and the weight have to be strictly limited to the capacity of the body. But fortunately, man's house need not grow on the foundation of his bones and occupy his flesh. Owing to this detachment, his ambition knows no check to its daring in the dimension and strength of his dwellings. Since his shelter does not depend upon his body, it survives him. This fact greatly affects the man who builds a house, generating in his mind a sense of the eternal in his creative work, and this background of the boundless surplus of time encourages architecture, which seeks a universal value overcoming the miserliness of the present need. I've already mentioned a stage which life reached when the units of single cells formed themselves into larger units, each consisting of a multitude. It was not merely an aggregation, but had a mysterious unity of interrelationship. Complex in character, with the differences within of forms and function. We can never know concretely what this relationship means. There are gaps between the units, but they do not stop the binding force that permeates the whole. There is a future for the whole, which is in its growth. But in order to bring this about, each unit works and dies to make room for the next worker. While the unit has the right to claim the glory of the whole, yet individually it cannot share the entire wealth that occupies a history yet to be completed. Of all creatures, man has reached that multicellular character in a perfect manner, not only in his body, but in his personality. For centuries, his evolution has been the evolution of a consciousness that tries to be liberated from the bounds of individual separateness and to comprehend in its relationship a wholeness which may be named man. This relationship, which has been dimly instinctive, is ever struggling to be fully aware of itself. Physical evolution sought for efficiency in a perfect communication with the physical world. the evolution of man's consciousness sought for truth and a perfect harmony with the world of personality. There are those who will say that the idea of humanity is an abstraction, subjective in character. It must be confessed that the concrete objectiveness of this living truth cannot be proved to its own units. They can never see its entireness from outside, for they are one with it. The individual cells for our body have their separate lives, but they never have the opportunity of observing the body as a whole with its past, present, and future. If these cells have the power of reasoning, which they may have for aught we know, they have the right to argue that the idea of the body has no objective foundation, in fact. And though there is a mysterious sense of attraction and mutual influence running through them, these are nothing positively real. The sole reality which is provable is in the isolation of these cells made by gaps that can never be crossed or bridged. We know something about a system of explosive atoms whirling separately in a space which is immense compared to their own dimensions, yet we do not know why they should appear to us a solid piece of radiant mineral. And if there is an onlooker who at one glance can have the view of the immense time and space occupied by innumerable human individuals engaged in evolving a common history, the positive truth of their solidarity will be concretely evident to him, and not the negative fact of their separateness. The reality of a piece of iron is not provable if we take the evidence of the atom. The only proof is that I see it as a bit of iron, and that it has certain reactions upon my consciousness. Any being from, say, Orion, who has the sight to see the atoms and not the iron, has the right to say that we human beings suffer from an age-long epidemic of hallucination. We need not quarrel with him, but go on using the iron as it appears to us. Seers there have been who have said, do you want to say that, Kwan? Veda hamitam, I see, and lived a life according to that vision. And though our own sight may be blind, we have ever bowed our head to them in reverence. However, whatever name our logic may give to the truth of human unity, the fact can never be ignored that we have our greatest delight when we realize ourselves in others, and this is the definition of love. This love gives us the testimony of the great whole, which is the complete and final truth of man. It offers us the immense field where we can have our release from the sole monarchy of hunger, of the growling voice, snarling teeth, and tearing claws, from the dominance of the limited material means, the source of cruel envy and ignoble deception, where the largest wealth of the human soul has been produced through sympathy and cooperation, through disinterested pursuit of knowledge that recognizes no limit and is unafraid of all time-honored taboos, through a strenuous cultivation of intelligence for service that knows no distinction of color and clime. The spirit of love, dwelling in the boundless realm of the surplus, emancipates our consciousness from the illusory bond of the separateness of self. It is ever trying to spread its illumination in the human world. This is the spirit of civilization, which in all its best endeavor invokes our supreme being for the only bond of unity that leads us to truth, namely that of righteousness. He who is one, above all colors, and who with his manifold power supplies the inherent needs of men of all colors, who is in the beginning and in the end of the world, is divine, and may he unite us in a relationship of goodwill.
Beautiful. Very good. Yeah, I'm sure that Quan has some thoughts, but the thing that really struck me is when you look at the type of force that Darwin's theory of evolution was having on the world back then. It wasn't a done deal like it is today, like where we're told, there's no other countervailing theory of evolution that you can possibly treat as respectable. It's like Darwin solved it. That's it. Stop thinking about it. But back when he was speaking in the 1920s, that wasn't at all the case, and that there was still much greater access to a way of thinking about evolution, which, I mean, it's very striking what he's doing here, because it's so anti-Darwinian in so many ways, although he's obviously paying credence to certain elements of it, but infusing a certain creative lawfulness and in his understanding of what is driving this process. Is it just like random mutations, randomly just, causing changes on a very small scale, which then just create these attributes in individual organisms, which then give them the power of spreading their genetic stock against the weaker in a struggle for survival, where there's really no idea of a whole species or a principle of life in the Darwinian system. It's all just built up from the bottom up as a sum of parts, right? The whole is just a sum of parts struggling, pushing against each other and pulling away from each other. Whereas this approach I just find it so much more natural to look at how is it all, organized around purpose and certain, organizing principles that deal with the mind. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts or anything that struck them. There's a lot in here.
I'm imagining things, or there's a background of speaking people.
I think there is. I don't know where that's coming from. Oh, hey, Harry.
Hey, I think I might have something. I'm just looking over some of these notes. Had one that hit me, but I'm going to try and find it real quick.
Harry, is there background in your room or in your house? Like background noise, I mean? And that's okay if there is. It's fine. I'm just curious where it's coming from.
It's my parents in the kitchen, so
that's
go.
Okay. No worries.
Okay, cool. I'll keep them on mute until I find this.
Harry, are you looking for your note? Oh, okay.
So the one I came across that I thought was interesting was the idea that truth is an abstraction of the eternal into the realm of the material. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I brought from it. And the whole point of evolution is just bringing that out over the course of time through intelligent design and not through, happenstance. So yeah. That was mine. What do you guys think about that? I'm just curious.
Really realizing ourselves and others, that I thought that was an interesting observation.
Yeah, as the substance of love, being able to put yourself and sympathize, empathize with others. So you're not just looking out for your own well-being, but
that's where it's coming from. Yes.
Mm-hmm. The idea of the infinite, definitely, and the finite, these concepts of the seeming opposites, and are very important, I think, in all great thinkers who are really like navigating through the ocean of the unknown and making discoveries. They're all working with the interesting coexistence of the finite and the infinite, the temporal and the eternal, right? And one of the things that caught me on that note was the minimum maximum principle too, because either something is the minimum or it's the maximum. But he zeroes in on this mechanism that's sort of harmonizing species over time that are coming and going, and which type, around this idea that there's a minimum pressure on vital resources and a maximum of efficiency that's being that we're striving towards, right? I know you get this as well when you're thinking about, the Darwinian system, or many of the sort of popular systems tend to presume sort of this empty space, this infinitely extended empty space in which things called objects happen in time. You can imagine like a big infinite box, and then like things sort of like hitting each other and pulling on each other with forces in a box. But there's no like shape to this space-time. Whereas when you look at it from the standpoint of one of these more fruitful thinkers, they're always looking at, well, why is it that we have, like in a planetary orbit, a maximum speed and a minimum speed? It's not just constantly the same speed around the planet or around the sun. There's always like a minimum and a maximum. And how do we then use those extremes to then find singularities that will capture the mind, right? And then we can look for resonances. We can look for harmonics when we can think about that, and then glean some insight into the nature of this invisible space-time, which we're trying to figure out.
Matt, who came up with the minimum maximum principle? I've never come across that.
I have gathered from reading some of the works. A few months ago, we were working through the works of a recently deceased economist named Lyndon LaRouche, and he was going through some history of science. And in it, he zeroes in on the character from the 15th century named Nicholas of Cusa, who spent a lot of time working through the minimum maximum as a principle. Kind of like, I think Cusa's example was, and correct me, anybody who knows this if I'm saying it wrong, but it was the circle, right? And he was like, you could either look at the circle as if it were an object, and call it a circle and define it, because how would you define a circle? If you were just asked to put into words, what would you say is a characteristic of a circle?
Shape.
How is it different from a square? What's a?
It's maybe it's singular, like it doesn't change at any point.
Yeah. So all of the perimeter of it are of the same distance, is what you're saying, right, to the center. Whereas the square, that's not the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, correct. So you could say the circle, is it made up of infinite points that make up that perimeter, or is it something else that's making up the perimeter around the center? How would you think about it?
Maybe it's not infinite points. Maybe it's just a constant distance from the center.
Well, that puts you already into two different sort of ways of thinking. Because if you were somebody who was just fixated with objects and not a process, right? If you were like a noun-based person, not a verb-based thinker, you would say, yeah, it's probably just a thing. It's a whole bunch of infinite spots around a point in the middle. But if you were thinking about it as you were sort of alluding to, then you could think of it as the effect. The circle is sort of the shadow of having, you could take a pencil and, you could draw a circle, right? And it's not the perfect circle, obviously. You can make a better circle. It would be better if you had a compass. But the circle is just a shadow of the rotational action. So there's a rotational action, right? Which is primary. And then as an effect, you have like the shadow, this artifact called circle. But it's not a self-evident thing. It's the effect of something else. So in Cusa's world, he's investigating how when you have a circle, when you create it, it's the shape that has the maximum area created with the minimum amount of perimeter. Every other perimeter you could create, let's say a square or a hexagon or octagon or keep on adding sides, you'll always have more perimeter than you would for the circle, and also the amount of energy going into it. So when you create a rotation like that, you're getting the biggest effect with the minimum amount of input.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
That's super cool. How does that relate to the theory of evolution he's talking about here, though?
Well, he was, I think with Tagore, he is looking at the question of the harmony of parts. How do we figure out, how do we make sense of the seeming disharmonies we see with like organisms arising and then disappearing in time? And a lot of them are out of, they lack a certain harmony.
Gotcha. I see. So one has like too much attributes in the physical realm, and then one is lacking in another realm, but most of them seem to be more physical than not, and that's why they die off. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Sort of.
Okay.
But I think when Tagore was describing the minimum pressure on the vital resources and the maximum efficiency was the wording that he used.
Gotcha.
What all life is sort of zeroing in on. I think that was on page 41. He's sort of getting at, I think he's, and somebody could correct me again, I will never achieve like the perfect mix of like totally like the best of the best. Now we've got it because we could just stop. Because like he said at the beginning of the story, he remember he told on the first page, he's like, why did he choose that story of him with a young girl performing a little story about, he's a character locked in a dungeon and he's calling for help. And she's like, well, why doesn't somebody just go and help you? And he's like, well, that doesn't make a very good story, does it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of, that's interesting. That's kind of like, I don't know,
but it didn't fit. And she was like, really happy.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. No, it makes it more interesting. Isn't there a theory about that? I forgot if it's a Hindu god or something like that, but the story of life is just a dream within his dream, and within his dream there's another one of himself, and just extrapolates up. That's a different thing, but it's still a story that is encompassing like what's going on, which is kind of cool. So
did you read the first chapter?
No, I just jumped in like right now, and so
what you just hit on is it's sort of what he also alluded to in the first chapter, and especially in the poem that's on the first page of this book, is very much what you just touched upon. Awesome.
Nice. Well, I will go back and read. I didn't catch the homework before the talk, but
I didn't make it explicit.
Okay, gotcha. Cool.
What do you think, Quan?
Well, very interesting, because I would say that I think that your guys expressed in another way the two quotes that I would like to offer. And Tagore know how to compose his chapter, because the first quote I would like to offer is at the end of the chapter, page 44, and there's no need to go to page 44 because it's quite short. So he realizes himself in the perspective of the infinite. Okay, so I would say that this short sentence could have been at the beginning, but it's at the end, but that's fine too. And the other one that is at the beginning of the chapter, page 29, last line of page 29, and the first 7 lines of page 30. And maybe it would be a good idea to go to page 29, 30. I don't know if Matthew, are you there?
Sorry, I had a little technical difficulty. You said page 30?
Yes, but last line of page 29. So we can go to page 30.
Yeah. Here we are.
All right. So the same thing is true with regard to mind and the consciousness of self. They are revelations of a great meaning, the self-expression of a truth. In man, this truth has made its positive appearance and is struggling to make its manifestation more and more clear. Okay, and well, for someone who is completely imbued in Indian philosophy, this line is absolutely awesome and is struggling to make its manifestation more and more clear. That which is eternal is realizing itself in history through the obstructions of limits. And why I find this so absolutely awesome is that you know my obsession with the Chinese hexagram and the corresponding Platonic epistemological journey. One of my goals in discussing Tagore is to put into perspective that the Indian philosophy has more or less, or even exactly, the same epistemological steps. And those epistemological steps are not given directly here by Tagore, but correspond exactly to the famous 7 chakras. And I think that the importance is not necessarily to know the chakras or the names, because nowadays anyone can go into the internet and have them. So I would like to say simply 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you remember the hexagram from the I Ching, you have the lower trigram and the upper trigram, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And for Plato epistemology, you also have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. For Acacia 1, Acacia 2, Pistis for 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6 is Dianoa, Dialecticon, and Theoria. Precisely what Tagore is speaking here about the eternal that is realizing itself in history through the obstructions of limit is precisely the deployment of those epistemological levels in each of us, as in our human life now, or on a bigger cosmic scale in the history of evolution itself. So I don't want to be too heavy with introducing all kind of Sanskrit words. I would like only to show an image that I think that you guys saw. uh, I don't know if okay, for technical reason maybe it's not clear at all.
So if you get close to it and then don't move it, so move it closer, as close as you can, a little closer, and it should
Okay.
and
I
go into the
think that if
center.
I remove the light, it should. Okay, I think that you
There
guys
you
saw
are.
it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, what are we looking at
Okay,
there?
I think that there's no utility to know the details, but once you have the general image, I can talk a little bit about this. All right. So that's the famous graphic of the famous which resemble a little bit a 3 with a kind of crochet on the right side and a kind of opening on the top side, right? That is the graphic representation precisely of that epistemological journey as presented by the Indian philosophy. And when last time, I think it was in the Mencius and not in the first chapter of by Tagore, I was speaking of the personality, the individuality, and the universal self. Okay, so the A-U-M, A correspond to the personality, U to the individuality, and M to the universal self. And the dot in the image that I just showed you guys is when you transcend completely those 3 um, fields of energy, let's say. So I think that it's extraordinary that Tagore is capable to put in what I call poetical prose, something that can be tackled in a very technical manner. So that's, I don't want to destroy the beauty of the poetry by Tagore by being too heavy on the technical terminology. I just want to make you guys aware that that poetry, behind that poetry, there is a very strict and very serious journey of exploration of the inner universe, which is a science called Adi Atma Vidya, Adi ADHI, Atma ATMA, Vidya VIDYA, the science to make the soul complete. And that's all for my comment for now, because I want our exchange to remain conversational and not a kind of expose.
Well, it's great that you just said that, because yeah, towards the end, he was making the point that using the example of the child with the pocket knife was a good one. You know, we have weaker claws. You know, most other animals could outpace us physically, most big mammals. But we were able to develop such things as like a pocket knife. We didn't have to wait billions of years. We could like invent this in a condensed period of time and use it, but you could also terrorize people with it. You know, like he gives the example of the brat on the schoolyard who's like abusing his pocket knife, you know, and hurting people. And similarly, the more we become a creature of mind that defines the flow of our evolutionary destiny, a self-conscious thinking, we have the benefit of these great inventions, but at the same time, we have to develop our inner nature in harmony with that outer physical nature. And if we don't develop that inner kingdom in a harmonic way, you'll always have the misuse of our creations in the ways that we, you know, I don't have to give any concrete examples. It's pretty obvious in the world today,
Well,
right?
absolutely, Matthew. And you will lash at me, but once again, you show your brilliance by understanding that, by giving a specific example based on a certain level of mind development. And that is exactly the message. For those who were here last time, do you remember the answer that has been given why the pronoun she has been given rather than he or it?
You mean in the poem?
Yes. Because last time I didn't want to interrupt and let people give their answer who are perfectly good, okay? But as I said, under that seemingly vague poetry, there's something very specific. There's a reason why Tagore used she at that level. And I remind you that it's because he's a man.
Jerry, do you remember?
We can go to the poem if
Yeah, I
it's
was thinking
okay.
about that. Here, I'll go to the
I
poem.
missed last week.
Oh, you missed that, right? You were given a presentation somewhere, right? Right. Where's the poem? Uh-oh, I went too far. There we are.
Okay, so I think it's in the second stanza.
Who wants to? Should we maybe let's just reread the thing, because Jerry and Harry missed it.
Absolutely. I think it's worth to do that.
Who would like to?
Jerry, do you want to read it?
Yeah,
Since you were not.
Since I wasn't here last week. The eternal dream is born on the wings of ageless light that renders the veil of the vague and goes across time, weaving ceaseless patterns of being. The mystery remains dumb. The meaning of this pilgrimage, the endless adventure of existence, whose rush along the sky flames up into innumerable rings of past, till at last knowledge gleams out from the dusk in the infinity of human spirit, and in that dim lighted dawn, she speechlessly gazes through the break in the mist at the vision of life and of love, emerging from the tumult of profound pain and joy.
Okay, so when at the third line before the end, counting from the end, the pronoun she is used by a man, since it was a poem written by Tagore, is to show that he was trying to describe the epistemological level at number 3. Okay. Once again, I want to for the Greek rope map by Plato and for the Chinese rope map by the I Ching, they don't take into account the physical development. For the Indian rope map, they take into account the physical development. That's why they have 7 stations instead of 6, right? So to make things easier to compare, I will ignore also the first station of the Indian road map. And so he was speaking of the 4th station of the Indian road map, which is the 3rd station, okay? If we don't take into account the first station. And in that station of the heart, a man is considered receptive, okay? Because if we take the Indian road map, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, at the first level, which is the body, the sexual organ of a man is active and the sexual organ of a female is receptive, okay? So the second station for a man being receptive, the 3rd station being active, and the 4th station being receptive. That is the station of the heart or of the Anahat chakra. For a man, for a woman, it would be the reverse. That's why he used the pronoun she, because he was speaking of himself, but he was speaking of the epistemological level of the psyche, okay? Because in Western jargon, the psyche is the epistemological level just under the soul, or to use the Platonic terminology, is dianoa, okay? So that's why he used she. And it's quite important because Tagore, once again, I said that it was an excellent idea to choose him because he would express in a very poetical and conversational way things that would be much heavier to discuss if we use some technical treatise. And I want to be the heavy guy to bring on the technical aspect, because I would say that it would be quite sad if I don't bringing those concepts of Indian psychology, yes, because sometimes if you don't have the background of Adi Atma Vidya, you have the feel you wouldn't feel that he's expressing some eternal truth, but without, I would say, the detailed understanding.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I mean, the thing that really struck me, and I really appreciate having that background that you can provide to this sort of thing, Kwan. But the I mean, the idea of the she as well, that because the whole poem seems to have a sort of thorough composition from the beginning and the end, where it sort of begins one way regarding the birth, a birthing process of an infinite and eternal dream from another infinite, the ageless light. So you've got 2 infinite concepts and a birth born on the wings of, right? And then at the end,
absolutely,
after going through this journey, there's like this real tension throughout. There's a lot of ambiguity. There's a pilgrimage. There's an idea of an infinite adventure, right? And so there's these flames and all sorts of imagery that indicate sort of tension, that striving towards, but then towards the end, you have now a recapitulation of she speechlessly gazes through the break in the mist at the vision of life and of love, which is sort of the culmination of this process, emerging from the tumult of profound pain and joy, which is sort of the 2 opposing emotions that one would expect a mother would feel after going through the pain of birth and then feeling the joy, right?
Absolutely. That's why I said last week that the general interpretation that have been offered were absolutely spot on. You have the more focused understanding, and you have the more global understanding, more encompassing understanding. Because what you just said is absolutely valuable, of course. Because once again, its epistemological journey is the delivery of the mind. So he expressed in a very poetical manner the delivery of the mind.
Mm-hmm. And again, I know Socrates always had fun playing with words, right? How he was always considered himself as a midwife of ideas to help detect when people were pregnant, when they felt like they were going to give birth to a great conception, or whether they just had a stillbirth of an idea, like a wind egg, because they were full of themselves and they thought they knew something that they didn't know. And he's like, I got the skill that I could like detect who's got the potentiality. And I see myself as somebody who helps give birth to conceptions. I help them conceive. He'd always play around with that language. No one really needs to be on mute in general. I'm noticing that everyone's on mute. Well, it's still relatively early. I mean, we could keep on talking about what we read. We did read a lot, or we could read on. I mean, I was just wanted to just share one thing that struck me, which was Cynthia's class on Sunday on the limits to growth, and how relevant Tagore's approach has been as well, that deals with what Cynthia was dealing with regarding how, at the first few pages of chapter 2, how he's zeroing in on the constant characteristic of living things, living processes, always leaping beyond the limits that are always pressing on us from the cold of the Arctic and the heat and the dryness, and everything that we take for granted are all killers for early forms of life. But yet there's this, and he even used the word life invents new instruments, which is usually something you would normally reserve for discussing human economy and human mind. But he's actually seeing the human mind as a metaphor for all of the striving of what accounts for the creation of new inventions, right, that occur without logic. It's part of the fabric of creation, which allows us then the freedom to live, to move in a greater expression of its meaning without ever fulfilling that meaning, but always moving towards it. But this always this constant reciprocation of the universe, the whole, the pressure upon us, and the ability within us to yearn and to then make those leaps beyond the limits to growth.
Speaking of the limits to growth, I had a hit on that. I was thinking about, because we were discussing the two, there's some competing ideas of like the best way to view the world economy and like how to best proceed forwards. And what Tagore was saying, from what I heard a little bit, was he was talking about creatures and things that focus on a quantitative mindset. It becomes overly simplistic and also overly extravagant, and that leads to failure. Whereas that creatures and forms of life that are more qualitative are able to be more simple and then also be able to adapt and then succeed. So in the limits to growth thing, I thought about that when we were reading. I was like, oh yeah, because we were talking about how you can look at it as there being like a limit to, like, we looked at the graph of the amount of, was it cadmium or uranium, one of
Oh,
the things that
chromium.
chromium, right? Yeah, and it was like we can look at this one thing and we can see how you wouldn't, like, they have predicted that we would have used way more of it than we should have by now, but we've been able to outsmart reality, so to speak, because they're looking at it as a quantity first mindset, not a possibility and like adaptability mindset. That's what I brought or got from it, you know.
Mhm.
I don't know if anybody else thought about that, but I thought it was
Yes.
cool.
I think in that
Oh,
book,
and just quickly on that note too,
Oh.
that he talked about the value too. You know, like that there's no a resource. What is a resource? And he said, you know, the universe started with everything that we have in it, but the value is something beyond analysis. And you know, with the creative mind, we have a way to shape value so that it's never this one limited thing to us. Our relationship to everything is constantly changing qualitatively based on our creative understanding of things too. Sorry, Jerry, for interrupting.
that's okay, anytime. No, I was just the part that Juan had us read there on page 30. The last line, the last sentence, it was it? Tagore says the obstruction of limits. And I love the way he said that, because, yeah, that which is eternal is realizing itself in history through the obstructions of limits. That we don't think of limit as something permanent, you know, carved in stone, as they say. But he says it's just an obstruction. A limit is an obstruction. So it's saying potentially there's a way to get around it or to solve the limit, the obstruction. I just thought that was a brilliant way of putting it in a few words.
Exact. And I would like to add that those limits can be perceived under different concepts, but there's one concept that is embedded in the epistemological roadmap. Okay, so I would like to ask a quiz question to everyone. What is that concept? Okay, because limits can be conceptualized by many things, right? But I have the pretension to say that from the maieutic perspective, there's a concept that is present in both the Greek, the Chinese, and the Indian roadmap. What is it? Because that's the obstruction with a capital T and capital O. You know that I like capitals, so.
Are you referring to ignorance?
Oh, wow. That's an indirect answer. I accept that answer. But that's not the precise answer. There's a precise answer, but you have a general answer that if I had to give you a grade, I would say B plus. But I need an A plus answer from you,
Okay.
Matthew.
Someone else jump in then.
Because the answer is obvious. Okay, I said the Chinese, the Greek, and the Indian roadmaps. Okay, so the answer is obvious. When I will give the answer, you will all say, "Oh, it was obvious." Okay, I give the answer. It's very simple. Okay, those limits are the epistemological stations. Okay, okay. Let's take the Greek roadmap. When we say acacia, if the person at acacia 1 or 2 cannot uplift himself to pistis or dianoa or dialecticon or theoria, well, each of these stations is a limit, is an abstraction.
So you mean it's the very inability itself to go from one level to the next level that you would say it's the lack of the ability itself, which is the obstruction? It's not anything pressing upon the striver, but is something internal, is what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because once again, I read the sentence that Jerry had the genius to identify. That which is eternal is realizing itself in history through the obstructions of limits. And if I remind you guys the short sentence from page 44, he realizes himself in the perspective of the infinite. Of course, the rope map is not the reality, okay? We have three great civilizations, the Greek one, the Chinese one, and the Indian one, offering three roadmaps almost identical with their own language, of course, okay? I'm not saying that those stations are absolute reality, okay? Those are the roadmaps offered by the sages of the past. There can be other roadmaps, however, they correspond a certain reality to a certain reality and offer a certain idea. But if we accept or not the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it's not so a big deal because we can make new maps. But what is certain is that there are certain epistemological stations that have been well identified by great psychologists of the past, and they offer us those epistemological stations because those epistemological stations are by themselves the intrinsic obstructions, because once again, we are discussing of the delivery of the mind. And in this group, we favor the Greek roadmaps, the Chinese roadmap, and we're discussing now the Indian roadmap, okay? Maybe in the future, we will discuss the roadmaps from other cultures, but for now, we use mostly those three civilizations for our discussions. When I say Greek, I mean Western too, of course.
Oh, Young Hong, you don't have to raise your hand. We're all friends here. You could just jump right in.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry. So again, I realized the importance of doing your homework, right? So sorry, I didn't jump in because I didn't have the time to do my homework, but it's a good excuse. I've been working for the whole day at school, so I just came back home. So, but after listening to the discussion, I would just like to share a poem or a verse by a wise person and demonstrating or showing the difference and also the relationship between the limited and also the unlimited. Can I? Yeah, just a poem. I'm trying to translate it into English at the same time. The title of it is Human Beings have their capabilities. They also have their limit. Human beings can grow trees, but they cannot grow forest. Human beings can dig a pond, but cannot dig an ocean. Human beings can pave or can accumulate, construct a hill, a small hill, but they cannot construct a mountains. And human beings can build skyscrapers, but they cannot build the way leading to heaven. Human beings can travel around the world, but they cannot go beyond the realm of their state of mind. Human beings can think of methodologies, but they cannot think of truth. So that's the poem I would like to share, because for me, this poem, there's a limit. There's, of course, human beings
All right,
are
sorry,
very,
Young
yeah.
Hong, what was the last line? Sorry, I didn't hear. I didn't
Okay,
hear
for
the last
sure.
line very well.
Human beings can think of methodologies or different ways, but they cannot think of truth.
Truth?
Yeah, truth. Truth is not something, truth, beauty, and goodness. Truth.
Oh, humans can think of methodologies, but not truth?
Yeah, that's it. Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
human beings can travel around the world, but they cannot go beyond their state of mind. So that's the limit. There's a limit that for us, but we are also capable of things. For me, the limit is like we are all a water drop, right? No matter how good this water drop is, we always have our limit. But this limit of being a water drop seems like an obstruction, but actually this water drop is connected with the ocean. If this water drop knows how to join with another water drops, and then together they will become bigger. It will become a pond and then a river, and then this river will go together back to the ocean. So when the water drop is back into the ocean, and this water drop will have the capacity of an ocean, that means that the limited water drop will become unlimited. So that's that's about me and us together. One single person is always limited, but if we walk towards the same goal together, and we can be unlimited. Thank you. That's what I want to share.
Thank you, Young Hong, because I would like to make a link between you and Harry. Harry, you said maybe 20 minutes ago about the expression, a dream within a dream, right? That's one famous sentence that is quite associated with the Indian wisdom and philosophy. Can you elaborate more on that?
Sure, I can try. It's been a while since I read about it. I think it might have been
Harry. I think that's a movie, right? So I forgot the name. What's your name?
Inception. Yeah.
Just
no, I think I came across that in Alan Watts' lecture at one point a while ago. I don't know that I can elaborate on it too much. I do remember him talking about that fact that the creator God dreams up the world, and he's sitting. Go on, Lee, you'll be able to tell exactly what it is, but in my recollection, he's sitting on either a lily pad or a flower in a pond, and then in the dream, that's also what's happening. It just up levels. Is that kind of close?
Kind of close.
Okay.
Absolutely. Because levels is the key word.
Right. Okay. That's cool. Levels. Yeah, I don't know my Indian mythology or Hinduism too much, but I did know that part, so, or at least a fragment of it.
Yeah, because absolutely, I think that you make the right connection. Okay, because the poem started with the eternal dream is born on the wings of ageless light, right? And that eternal dream is the absolute dream of God, of course. But the three roadmaps from the Chinese, the Greeks, and the Indians, who are practically identical, offer the same epistemological station, or since we are dealing with a poet, I would try to avoid the very down to earth station word and say dream rather. Okay, so we have epistemological dreams, and for the I would be a bit unfair here. I wouldn't favor the Chinese hexagram to explain the different levels of dreams. Okay, so we have the upper trigram, the upper lines, what are 4, 4, 5, 6, and each of the level correspond to a certain level of dream. And the eternal dream is the last line, okay, the sixth line. And after that, you have another kind of dream, which is dialecticon for Plato, okay? I wouldn't always use the Greek words, okay, except for the hexagram. And after that, you have the Dianoa level of dream. And after that, you have the Pistis level of dream, and the Acacia 2 level of dream, and the Acacia 1 level of dream. Okay, so you have a 6 level of dreams, 7 for the Indians, because the Indian will take into account the body. Okay, but as I said 15 minutes ago, just to make them match perfectly, I would be brutal and remove the first level from the Indians. So we start at the second level of the Indians, but I call it to make it match with the Greek speaking, that I would make a link between what Yong Hong said and you. Because for those epistemological stations, the Indian have more poetical way to speak. So they would say that the second level of dreams are the dreams of the trees, of the flowers, of the vegetables. That's the first line. The second line would be the dreams of the animals. And the third line would be the dreams of the humans being, precisely. And when we go to the upper trigram, the fourth line corresponding to Dianoa, which be the dream of angels. Okay, Plato would say Dianoa, but the Indian would say Ashura, okay, which is a category of angel in Indian mythology. And Plato would say dialecticon, but the Indian would say devas, which is, let's say, archangels. And the last line is the eternal dream of God. So those epistemological station or dreams can be explained in a heavy manner by intellectual concepts or by lighter poetry, as Tagore is expressing himself here. And the expression "a dream within a dream," I adore that expression, okay? Because the second dream is the dream of God, of course, the highest form of dream. And the dream within a dream, the first dream, depends at which dream you are. Are you dreaming like a flower, like an animal, like a human, like an angel, like an archangel?
Right.
You cannot dream like God, of course, but you can be one with him.
Mind if I? Oh yeah, Young Hong, sure.
Oh, sorry, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah.
I never know when to talk, so I just
Well,
raise my hand.
Okay, I'll just say thanks. The thing that just struck me as you brought this up was the because there's this problem. It's not just in this very narrow filter of Darwinian natural, the Darwinian model of natural selection that we're given to sort of look through as a filter to interpret all creation that really prohibits the mind from moving in a more free way. But also you have a lot of other theories that are sort of imposed on us early on that we're told we have to abide by, like Big Bang, Big Bang cosmology, which itself has a lot of contradictions just on the surface, just by having the idea that there was a moment before there was nothing, right? already there. Like, how does something which is like everything come from nothing, which was the moment before 13.7 billion years ago, right? Like, there's a lot of just like very low level elementary contradictions into that system. But
it's low resolution.
Huh?
I said, yeah, it's a low resolution.
Very low, very pixelated. Yeah. And so you have this idea of like a very, again, there's an assumption of this linear extension of just a big box, again, of like empty space, empty time, and an XYZ axis that things just happen in, right? That there's no idea of quality as primary. Whereas when you're approaching it from the standpoint of like Tagore's poem or a lot of the great thinkers, what you have is a sense that we're living in, it's not like there's created things and then there's the creator alone. People who think that way tend to be somewhat rigid in their religious sort of inclinations. You know, you got this big, you know, bearded man in the sky that just created everything and now we're all creation, but there's like no connection. Like, how do you relate to that? How do you relate to that type of definition of God? You can't.
Matthew,
yeah.
that's the dream of that guy. You have to challenge him with a higher dream.
I know. I'm just, yes, it's true. You're totally right. But this is where the idea of, again, the dream, the idea that it's not just the creator and the created, but there's also creation, which is ongoing. We're constantly in this constant state of ongoing creation, and a dream is something which is, we know so little about dreams. Even now, like, we have theories, but very few people have spoken cogently about what is the purpose of dreams. It's a place where we all tend to go. Our minds can create. It's very metaphorical. It's a very, you know, it's a very natural. We're not trying to be metaphorical. It's just that's the natural state of the mind in a dream state, unbounded by reason and other things. But these are like dreams that are happening in creation, right? There's this idea of a constant creative process, almost like we're living in a thought that's coming into being, which gets
Absolutely.
you sort of out of that rigid Big Bang versus heat death problem that we all are sort of, you know, given.
Well, once again, Matthew, you are challenged to offer a better dream.
You're right. You're right.
And I want to quote what is appearing under the name of Yorika from the master Rumi from the 14th century. The art of knowing is knowing what to ignore. So we have to ignore the lesser dreams.
Interesting.
Dream can also be reality. That depends on how you look at it, from what perspective.
You said a dream could be a reality?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Depending on how you look at it, from which perspective.
Matthew, if someone is imprisoned in the epistemological station of pistis, okay, the number 3, the dream from pistis is his reality.
Right.
And someone at dialecticon would say you are dreaming. All right. It might seem a little bit snobbish to say that, but we're here to discuss. But the guy who is truly, and I insist the key word is truly, imprisoned in pistis, there is no other reality than pistis.
Right.
Are we talking about dream here?
About?
Are we talking about dream here?
Absolutely. We are speaking about epistemology, okay?
Yeah.
And when we say dream, it's a more poetical way to speak of epistemology and epistemological level. That's why I like so much to make rapprochement between the Indian roadmap, the Greek roadmap, and the Chinese roadmap, because I think, and that's my own prejudices, the Greek roadmap is the most rational in terms of expression. The Indian roadmap is the most poetical in terms of expression, and the Chinese roadmap is somewhere between the two, according to my prejudices. Maybe someone else could give another classification. But it doesn't mean that they don't have the understanding in the three cases.
Mhm.
They have the understanding in the three cases, but the way the Chinese express themselves, the Indian express themselves, and the Greek express themselves are different.
Mhm. Well, I know from the standpoint of Plato's divided line, and also, I mean, that comes up in the Republic, and I think it's the book before or maybe it's the same book as the cave allegory, which deals very much with that on the lowest level, there's those who cannot differentiate, who believe that their hallucinations are reality, and that's all there is. They can't differentiate at all, and that's sort of the lowest order of the climb towards the sublime, the philosopher king position, you know, but who can think about everything else from a very different place. And then you can move to the person who believes in their senses and tries to make sense of things, but just purely based on sensory information. They don't necessarily believe in, like I was thinking maybe, you know, like an infant might have, they don't have any concepts to make sense of the colors and the sounds and the images that they see around them. Their minds, I can't even imagine what my mind would have been like in the first few weeks, you know, of life. But it probably would have been somewhat hallucinatory, you know. It's kind of a psychedelic experience. But then, as you begin to gain control of these things, you know, you're like, okay, I am not this. This is actually working for me, you know, and you could start developing concepts and identities and interface with the world around you. You start moving through those phases of development. And from it just gets a little bit sad when somebody's body continues to mature, but their minds are prohibited from going through those natural states of growth that your body grows through because of, you know, we live in a world governed by, you know, political powers and people who don't really want us to grow. So
well, on that note, you had said that it's their hallucinations that are distracting them, like the shadows on the wall from the fire behind them. But if from what I remember, and I took this my freshman year like a while ago, so it might be inaccurate, but what I remember is there's figures behind them controlling like puppets. And so maybe they're not their hallucinations, maybe they're someone else's hallucinations imposed upon them. And what's sad is when people can't differentiate between that and reality of even the people standing next to them. Yeah.
Well said. Yeah.
Well, those are different layers of phenomenal reality.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's true.
Because when Matthew said hallucination, I did not interrupt him, but Matthew, you could have been nicer and say perspective.
Sure. I was trying to get to my hallucinatory mindset as a little baby. And I would like to read maybe 10 lines from page 48 and 49. The reality of a piece of iron is not provable if we take the evidence of the atom. The only proof is that I see it as a bit of iron, so that's a perspective, and that it has certain reactions upon my consciousness. Any being from, say, Orion, who has the sight to see the atoms and not the iron, has the right to say that we human beings suffer from an age-long epidemic of hallucinations. So great poets are meeting, you, Matthew, and Tagore. We need not quarrel with him, but go on using the iron as it appears to us. Seers there have been who have said, Veda hamitam, I see, and live a life according to that vision. And though our own sight may be blind, we have ever bowed our head to them in reverence. I would add, I don't think that those people want us to bow to them, but try to improve our epistemological level. I don't see Plato or Confucius or the great masters of Hinduism or Buddhism wishing us to bow to them, but rather
to improve our own perception and capability to see and to say Vedahamitam one day.
Mm.
Can I say something? Can I jump in?
Of course,
Do we still have time? I think it's already 10.
we've got a bit of time.
Are you sure?
Go ahead. Don't stop. Yes. Let it out.
That's yeah, just in relating to in response to what Quan just said and what Harry just shared, I think for me the keywords is also about the level or dimensions. So Quan made reference to the 7 or 6 dimensions. But for you, right? So it's you do the heavy stuff. I never know how to do the philosophical or heavy stuff. I always do the light part, okay, from life experience and from me as a person. So
okay, I agree on that division of labor, but we have to give me more money, however. So.
Well, sometimes happiness doesn't bring that much joy into people's lives. So, happiness doesn't mean that you can earn more. Sometimes light, like.
Well, it's a metaphor. It's a
Okay.
metaphor to say about, to speak about the death.
Who knows? I should earn more. Yeah, so talking about the dreams within dreams, right? There's also expression like there are worlds within world, and also there are realms within realms. So I was connecting that idea, dreams within dreams, with the 10 realms or 10 different type of state of mind, which was taught by Buddha. So for example, right, we are talking about dreams at different levels or different dimensions. So the lowest dimension, the state of mind, is dominated by anger or hatred. For example, if you are you are an angry person, and then there's no hope in your life, you are full of hatred, and then no matter what dream you have, it's filled with hatred, it's filled with anger. So that's the realm of hell. And then moving up, there's also a realm or a different level of hungry ghost. So if you are insatiable and about what you have, and if you are always greedy for things, and you are never happy about what you have, so your state of mind will be always, will be greedy. So no matter what kind of dreams you have, you'll be, like the dream will have a main characteristic, which is greedy dreams. So moving up, it's the same thing, like an animal, So the realm of the animal, the level of the animal, the state of mind is about being foolish or being ignorant. For example, in life, sometimes you think, it's too complicated. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to go deeper into this. I just want to have the simple life, right? Whatever, I just want to have some fun, some show, like pleasure. So that's the type of, no matter what dream you have, it will be a dream of foolishness and also the ignorance. So moving up like human beings and going further up, there are, different type of dreams. So even in the human world, you see there's a world, human world, there are also 10 different levels. Like in human world, there are also people who are whose heart is filled with hatred. So even they live in the human world, but actually all their dreams is in the hell because their heart is filled with hatred. So even within the same human world, there are people who are foolish, who refuse to go deeper, thinking about the meaning of their life. They just follow everyone, follow the trend, follow the flow, even though they have great doubts in their life. So they are living and they are having that state of mind of being an animal. So even within the human world, if human world is a dream, human dream, within the human dreams, there are many different types of dreams. Yeah, I would just like to relate to that. Yeah. So the key point is talking about dream, like what Quan just said, but I didn't have that kung fu, okay. But there was once I was listening to a very famous Buddhist master. He was talking about dream, okay. So Quan knows better than me, right? So when the monks with great practice and great kung fu and meditation, kung fu and meditation, when they're in deep meditation, they can actually perceive or can see people's dream. So for us, because their state of mind is from a higher dimension than the human beings. So for us, it's dream, it's immaterial. But for them, you know, when they come from a lower, a higher dimension, and they can see it. So that's why I said, depending on from which dimension you are in. So your dream, our dream, could be a reality for those looking at it from a higher dimension. I would say dimension, or yeah.
Yes.
But that's it. Yeah.
And I would say that from a more contemporary perspective, and I feel a little bad to say that, but we can even use the word, the narrative or storytelling to speak about dream. Okay. When Matthew, you were speaking of the Darwinian approach, I think that you know more than me on that, but there has been a consultation of certain group promoting Darwin, because that storytelling, that dream, that narrative fit their goals or their intentions, corresponding to their epistemological station.
Yeah. Which is like what Harry also just mentioned about the fact that people living thinking that the shadows were reality were actually not generating their own thoughts. Even they were living in the projection of those casting the shadows, who were the ones who were the myth makers, casting their dreams, which were actually, in hindsight, from the person who actually got out of the cage and looked back down, they were kind of nightmares, but people were induced to adapt to the nightmares, thinking that these were joyous things of others who
Right.
are absolutely not healthy. So
absolutely, they are forced to adapt, because at the level of Acacia 1 or 2, they did not develop a mind that is capable of autonomous production.
Yeah.
So the only thing that they can do is to adapt to the narrative offered by others, not necessarily with good intention. I say not necessarily because they are story maker or myth maker who have good intentions.
Interesting that they can't generate an independently thinking consciousness of their own, though. I think maybe that's because they haven't been exposed to it, though. But isn't that part of the allegory of the cave, when the person comes out into the light? At first, it's described as being very painful for them, and that's like a limit to their next stage of development. But then after they've been out in the world for a while, they have to go back into the cave and talk to another person, and that's when they're able to see things differently. But from the point of view of someone within it, it's harder to separate yourself out from that if that's all you would know.
Absolutely, because the guy who is facing the sun and suffering a little bit because he is exposed to the sun for the first time, well, that guy, to use Plato terminology, is 1 to 4 stage above Acacia. Okay, he's at dialecticon. He's almost dreaming the dream of God.
Use a plain language. The soul is about to awaken.
Exactly. Thank you for your precise sentence. Because and wow, I'm mocking a little bit, but I'm sincere at the same time. So the soul, when I said that, once again, bear with me, I always use the double trigrams, okay, the Chinese hexagram. At station 3 of the Chinese hexagram is the psyche. The psyche is the inchoate soul. And station 4 is the soul. Station 6 is cosmos. Station 5 is cosmos, forgive me. And station 6 is God, okay, if we want to use a Western terminology. And I think that I would try to use as much as possible Western terminology. So the psyche, the soul, cosmos, and God. So truly the guy at dialecticon, the soul is already present and is about to open completely.
Mhm. And the ultimate sort of pathetic tragedy of so far a lot of a big chunk of the human experience. Cynthia and I have been talking about this for a while because she's working on a fabulous series of articles going through Aldous Huxley, but what was the culture that Aldous Huxley both came out of and then fed back into? Because his thoughts are such a shaper of so much grand strategy of the world that we live in that we underestimate the power of certain individuals' ideas as they were put into motion, shaping things. So you're like, well, what was the world he lived in? What did he believe as a person? And Cynthia's been just obsessively working through mountains of literature, producing what's turning in. What is it? It's going to be a quadrilogy, or it started off as a trilogy. Now it's going to be part 4, but maybe part 5 and 6 too, right? I can't hear you at all.
Sorry, I forgot I was muted. I have no idea, but actually I wanted to pick Kwan's brain at some point because it's becoming apparent that they really do refer to Indian philosophy heavily, but it's obviously a corruption. And it's
well, when you say they, you're talking about the
Aldous Huxley, but also like even Aleister Crowley in the Freemasonry. There's elements of that. The Madame Blavatsky, all of this weird occultism that actually came from like the same. They really overlapped with each other, and it actually has like anarchist overlaps as well. It's a very strange grouping of people that came together, but Indian philosophy was one of the core things that they were bringing into a type of religion that they were creating. And I'm obviously way above my head in commenting on how that happened, but it would be interesting if I could maybe even just find some kind of writing from one of them that I could share with Kwan, and then he could help explain what's going on.
Cynthia, I would be delighted, but I would say that one of the major clue that you can use is parody, okay? Often they would make a parody of the true teaching. If you take, for example, the Masonic lodges, often they would make a parody of the majesty and of the dignity of the ceremonies of the church, okay? And it would debase something that is sacred, and at the same time would confuse people, and would bring them to think that the original teaching is not valuable. And that's the goal. That's the true goal, to make people believe that the original teaching of the masters is just hocus pocus and bandadash. Because the original teaching of the master will bring people to the next dream, okay, from Acacia 1 to 2 to Pistis to Dhyana, and from Dhyana you are beginning to be capable of autonomous thinking. The soul, is appearing. At dialecticon is the guy who is outside the cave and is facing the sun of the absolute for the first time. He suffers from that, but at the same time he knows it's a birth pangs, and that 5 to 6 is more mystical, okay, the union of God and so on. But
Mhm.
even if we stay at dialecticon, even at Dianoa, okay, because what we want is to create citizens. And how do you become a true citizen? You need to have the power to think by yourself,
Mhm.
autonomously, so that you will not be influenced by the fantasies projected by people not having good intentions necessarily.
Mhm. Mhm. Well said. Thank you.
Yeah, and the thing in you, Cynthia, telling me about your and sharing with me your research in the last few days, especially in our conversation, what struck out is that it's sort of something you kind of knew already on some level, but it became more visceral when you're actually like pulling out the details of Monte Verita and Ascona and these weird ritual sex magic spots in Switzerland that they're all like congealing on with Freemasonic like it gets really weird, right? And they really tend to believe in a lot of the myths that they create, both for their victims but also for themselves. And so even the people you're trying to like find, okay, well, where are the logical, cold, calculating figures in the social engineering spectrum, you know, as you go up the high command and you're like, how are you thinking? What is your worldview? And you're like, no, it's just as crazy everywhere you go up. They are all believing in the mythologies that they're creating for themselves in their own way. And so they all have this weird cultish, you know, immaturity, this infantilism.
Well, maybe what Quan said is the best way to think about it at this point is that their dream has been shaping everything below them.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
yeah, it's not necessarily even a kind of intelligently conscious evil necessarily. It's
they are in their own prison.
Yeah. Someone needs to pour some cold water in them. Fucking slap them and wake them up.
Yes, and there's one word in Sanskrit for that. It's called Maya.
Sorry.
Maya. Maya is usually translated as illusion, but it's better to say Maya is a conceptual dream. Okay, so you have the level of Maya of your epistemological dreaming. And why do they create a certain kind of narrative? Because that narrative is a reflection of their Maya or their epistemological dream. And of course that they wouldn't be fascinated or hypnotized or mesmerized by their own production.
Exactly.
Inevitably.
And in the future, if there are good occasion, I would love to share with you some real dreams, okay, shared by my friends. Dreams can be from different sources. Sometimes it could be from higher realms, sending us the reminder. But sometimes it could be from lower realms, disturbing our mind for their purpose. But of course, there are some dreams which is messy and with no direct connection with either higher dreams or realms or lower realms. For example, if we watch a movie, a kung fu movie tonight, right, there's a serious killer or something like that. Right? Some of the scene may go into our dreams and shape our dreams, but this is some type of, like a messy dream, carrying no real significant life messages. Yeah, just, yeah.
Cool, guys. Well, this is a very mentally stimulating and spiritually stimulating little 2-hour experience here. I very much appreciate everybody taking the time and participating in this. It's too bad we lost Bob. And Eureka, if you're still there, thank you for putting up that little image. It's great. Okay, guys. So this Sunday we have Michael Claridge, who will be delivering the lecture at 2 p.m., not 4 p.m. We'll try to do it 2 p.m. as much as possible on Sundays. This one is going to be streamed. Also, we're going to do an experiment. We're going to stream it live on Rogue News as well. So we'll see how that goes. And yeah, the week afterwards, we'll have something on Pythagoras, the Pythagorean method that has been obscured. But between that, we'll jump into chapter 3.
You didn't say what Michael Claridge's class was going to be on.
It's hard for me to put into words because it's not clear.
Philosophical.
It's going to be a metaphysical, theological extrapolation of his work in science, dealing with the Trinity as he wants to do it. So I don't know. I'm fascinated.
Matthew, forgive me. I have been absent-minded. When you said that there wouldn't be an explanation on the Pythagorean method, is it by Dr. Claridge?
No, that's going to be the following week there after that one.
Okay, the next week. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
Okay, guys.
All righty.
Thank you
Have
so
a great
much.
night.
Good
Awesome.
night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks again.
Good night.